Go for it, King.
Peace to you, yours, Brother Blue Pill, reporting live and direct. Make sure that you check into Maccabees TV. Check the family out. All right, download and get your information. Peace.
Shalom, shalom, shalom. Welcome to another edition of Maccabees TV. As you can see, take a look. I see a whole bunch of books over here. And y'all see who it is, man. It's our brother Kashub Danite, historian, courtesy of Yeshiah, back again. I say shalom to you, brother. Welcome back to Maccabees TV.
Peace, Ak. How you doing?
All praise to the Most High.
Giving honor and praise to the Creator, maker of heaven and earth. This right here is going to be a part 1 and part 2. It's not going to be too long either way in regards to addressing certain things that have been said by Israelites or concerning Israelites from others. You go to 2 Kings 15:29, and it says, "In the days of Pekah, king of Israel, came Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, and took Ijon, and Abel Beit Ma'akah, and Yanoah, and Kadesh, and Hazor, and Galilee, in northern land of Naphtali, and carried them away to Assyria." Now that right there is Tiglath-Pileser III, who ruled in the 8th century BCE. All right, it's biblically speaking about him taking over one of the tribes of Israel. Now I have a book here. That's from the Bible I just read. This here is called The Ancient Near Eastern Texts and Pictures, External Reference by Pritchard. And on page 194, we see, "As for Menahem, I overthrew him like a snowstorm, and he fled like a bird alone, and bowed to my feet. I returned him to his place, and imposed tribute on him, silver, gold, and linen trimmings. I received from him, from the Omri land, Beit Hum-Riah, all the inhabitants and the possessions I led to Assyria. They overthrew their king Pekah, and I placed Hosea as king over them." So this right here, in part, speaks about Tiglath-Pileser's record that we see here in the orange, speaking in regards to what happened with him in ancient Israel. All right, so I just want that to be noted. This is the same Tiglath-Pileser that you read of in 2 Kings chapter 17. This is also the same one that you see in Chronicles 5:26 as Pul, or Pulu, who was also the king of Babylon. Because the Assyrians, since around his era, he ruled in both Assyria and in Babylon. All right, so I just want that to be noted. His successor and his son, that is to say as well, by the name of Shalmaneser. All right, he also ruled there by the name Ululai. All right, so this is actually pointed out in my book, Egypt Talk and Writing. So I just want that to be pointed out, right? Now go to 2 Chronicles 30, real quick, concerning this matter. And here's what we read, all right? So we can gain an understanding in regards to this. Chapter 30 and verse 10. It says, "So the post went for, 2 Chronicles 33:10. Sorry. And it says, "And the Most High spoke to Manasseh and to his people, but they would not hearken. Wherefore the Most High brought upon them the captains of the host of the king of Assyria, which took Manasseh among the thrones, bound him in fetters, and carried him to Babylon." Now this right here is talking about what happened with Esarhaddon, which was one of the kings of Assyria, who was actually the predecessor of Ashurbanipal. All right, Ashurbanipal later on in history was the king that wound up taking over Egypt in the year 671 BCE. So we just want to put correlation in history and timeline and what we're talking about. All right, so another thing to point out, we'll go back in here on page 201, and here's what we read. And it says Esarhaddon in his campaign. It says in part, "I called up the kings of the country of Hatti and of the region." Then it says what? On the other side of the Euphrates, Balu, king of Tyre, Manasseh, king of Yehuda or Judah. So right here on page 201 of this book is a source speaking about Esarhaddon, speaking about Manasseh, the king of Judah. Now, how does that become important is because there are many people who attempt to state that there's no record of it, there's no history of it, there's no archaeology of it. But when you can go and read the prisms themselves and see it and what it's talking about, you'll begin to see what it's talking about. All right, so it's not made up. Nobody makes up a story of getting their behind beat. All right, that's just illogical. All right, so I just want that to be noted. All right, so just want to sit there and put that as an intro in regards to this. Next thing I would like to get into what we're talking about is in regards to Israel. All right, charity begins at home, spread abroad, as the saying goes. Brothers and sisters in the house of Israel, don't reject what I'm about to present because I'm non-messianic. But Yeshiah is not the name. Exodus chapter 3, when it says his name, in Hebrew is the word Shem. Now, if you speak Lashon HaKodash, you will say name as the word Sham. The same word also means fame, F-A-M-E. The same word also means renown, what you're known for. Whether you have a good name or a bad name, that's what it's talking about in that regard. So that's something I'm going to point out in that particular aspect. Now, regard this book right here for external references, right? I'm going to go to page 78, if we will, in here, right? And here's what we read in this particular part right here. All right? This is called the Lachish Ostrakhan. All right? Lachish was a city in Judah. One of the groups of the Ostrakhan, or potsherds, inscribed in ink in alphabetical Hebrew, which was found in or near the main gate of ancient Lachish, is a burnt layer associated with the destruction of the city in 586 BCE. Now, one of the things I want to point out, and what is underlined, is where it says Yahweh, if you can see it, then it says YHWH, Yahweh, Yahweh, some say it's Yahuwah, Yahuwah, and so forth. But it's right there. So we can begin to see that this is dated long before the aspect of what happened with the Naysayers. So nobody can properly say that the Naysayers injected something in.
So let me just ask you a question before you go any further, real quick.
Yes.
So about what time period is the Lachish?
This is the 6th century BCE.
And about what time was the Naysayers?
We're talking the 10th century AD.
So this is thousands of years
Yeah,
in between.
yeah. So I just want to point that out in that regard. Now, the other thing to point out is when you go into what's referred to as the Ketef Hinnom, right, or Katef Hinnom. Now, that means basically talking about the hat or the crown of Hinnom. And in it, they found dating to the era of the 6th century BCE or the 7th century BCE, part of the book of Bamidbar or Numbers 6, when it says the Most High bless you and keep you. And you see the same thing, Yahweh, Yahweh, Yahuwah, Yahweh. You understand? That's written right there within the Hebrew. So we just want that to be pointed out. Now, for those who are Hebraically inclined, when you go to the book of 1 Samuel 18, verse 18, it distinctly says in there, David speaking of himself, he says, should I be son-in-law to the king? Now, when it says, shall I be, or should I be, which is accurately translated, or shall I be, son-in-law to the king, when he was being propositioned to marry Michal, or Michal was being propositioned to marry him, he uses the word ehyeh, ki ehyeh katan lamelech. Should I be the son-in-law to the king? Katan means son-in-law. All right. So just want to point that out in that particular regard. So the Yeshiah, ehyeh, was also said by King David in regards to himself. So certainly that verse in 1 Samuel 18:18 is not talking about regards to the Most High. Continuing on in this regard, many brothers and sisters, many use this, which is just as it says, Strong's Concordance. It's not a dictionary. It's a concordance. So I just want to point that out. Now, in Hebrew, 6703 or H6703, this word where you see my finger at, where the asterisk is, right? You have the word Zak. All right? And they say that that word means white, but it doesn't. Now, we went over this in the Smashing the Synagogue of Satan. I want to show an accurate dictionary, or more so accurate dictionary, and what it says for the same definition, and that is pure, clear, or bright. as you see where my middle finger is, right here. So it doesn't mean white, it means pure or clear. Because Songs of Solomon 5 verse 10, when it says Zak, they're trying to say in a racist ideology that it must mean white, which it does not. So I just wanted to point that out for reasoning purposes, for edification purposes. Now, continuing on where we was at from last, we're going to get into something in regards that a claim that was made about Israel never having won a war in history, externally or biblically. All right, and always under the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Medes, the Persians, and so forth and so on. We go to the Book of Kings, second Book of Kings. It says 1 verse 1. Then Moab rebelled against Israel after the death of Ahab. Then it goes to chapter 3 and 4. It says, and Misha, king of Moab, was a sheep master, and rendered unto the king of Israel 100,000 lambs and 100,000 rams with the wool. And it came to pass, when Ahab was dead, that the king of Moab rebelled against the king of Israel. So Moab was under subjection, biblically, under the house of Yeshiah. Now, you go to 2 Samuel 8:1. And it came to pass that David smote the Philistines and subdued them. And David took Metheg Ammah out of the hand of the Philistines. And he smote Moab and measured them with a line, casting them down to the ground. Even with 2 lines measured, he put to death, and with 1 full line to keep alive. So the Moabites became David's servants and brought gifts. So that's right here shows biblically what that's talking about. Now what I'm going to do right after that is go into this external reference right here to gain an understanding of what we're talking about. This here is a translation of the Misha Stela. And here's what he says. I am Misha, son of Chemos, king of Moab, the Debonite. Then he goes on to say in part, Omri, king of Israel, he afflicted Moab many days, because Chemos was angry with his land, and his son succeeded him. And he also said, I will oppress Moab. In my days he said this, but I saw my desire upon him and upon his house, and Israel perished utterly forever. So that's a part of the translation from the Misha Stela. Then it says, and the men of Gad occupied the land of Atarot from of old, and the king of Israel built Atarot for himself. So here we see this guy, Misha Moab, periodically referring to Omri, and then it mentions his son, which is Ahab. And then it talks about the men of Gad on the east side of the Jordan, and Atarot, which was one of the lands that the Moabites and the Israelites used to conflict over in history. So biblically you have it. Then you can research the the Misha Stela for your own accord. So I just wanted to point that out to the people, the person, the ideology that says that ancient Israel, biblically or externally, did not conquer any people. It was always the conquered. All right, so I just want that to be noted. It's stated right there in that regard. What some may do then is try to discredit that. Well, I'll put it to you like this. The house of Israel, recorded in what we have here in the scriptures, losing to Assyria, and the Misha Stela speaks about them losing in time to Israel. Before, I stated, nobody makes up a story of being defeated. So, on either end, Israel or Moab. So I just wanted to point that out for reason and purposes. Now, getting back into, we're going over different little things here and there for reason and purposes. Going back into this right here, the Hebrew dictionary right here. Okay, Hebrew with vowels is not Yiddish. So I just wanted to point that out. Modern Hebrew is not Yiddish. Only thing modern Hebrew is the ancient Hebrew put in a modern form. But it's not Yiddish. I want to point that out. Ach means brother. Achi is my brother. Brother in Yiddish is Bruder. And Muder is mother. Whereas in Yiddish, whereas in Hebrew it's Ima. So I just wanted to point that out. Now, right here, in this dictionary right here, I want to point this out. You see where my finger is, where the asterisk is? It has the word, you see it? Mm-hmm. Qua, which means cold. Okay? So I just want to point that out first. Okay? Then, we see right here where my finger and the asterisk is, right? On this side. right? It uses the word qarar, which means to cool, the verb. When you have a kuf and a resh and a resh, anytime in Hebrew, and you can check this out with any rabbi, when you have the second and the third root letter as the same, that's called an ayin verb. All right? So, quarti means I cooled, or qararti means I cooled. So you can say as quarti or qararti. All right, so I just want to point that out in that regard. Next thing, very quickly, is this. How they get a word like for refrigerator. They take the prefix of the letter mem and put it in front of the verb to cool. So you get mikwarir or mikwarar, which basically means a box or a thing that cools. That's the only thing that's done, because there were no refrigerators in ancient times. So what they've done, basically, and when I say they, I'm showing how the Hebraic aspect works, is you can take a verb and put a mem or the M sound in front of it and change the verb to a noun. So that's how Hebrew works. Now, another point is this. You read in Jeremiah 28, right, about Nebuchadnezzar, but that's not his name. That's his Hebraic transliteration of his Babylonian name, Nebu-Irasul. You understand? So just wanted that to be noted for edification purposes. So just a couple of things to point out. So they had to have some kind of sounds or vowels or something of that sort in order for their expansion to be able to be noted. Now, the Tower of Babel, right, was long before Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, or Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So the dispersion of the languages, all right, was already known. So by the time the house of Yisrael or Israel comes along the scene, they certainly would have had sounds and understandings once it came down to that. So just wanted to point those couple of things out in that regard. All right, so modern Hebrew is not Yiddish. We can explain that right there. All right, so let that be noted. Now, wanted to get into and closing this particular thing out, because I stated it's not going to be long, man. I want to get into a couple of references books, external sources, if you will. Because as the brother Daniel had pointed out, we have our references. We do our studies. I have a book here, part in the cover. It's called Slave Community, right? And I'm going to go to page 74 in this book. It's about slavery in the South. And it says this: Oluda Equiano in Igbo stress the similarities between some of the Old Testament customs of the Jews and those of his own people. And it says verbatim, like the Israelites in their primitive state, our government was conducted by our chiefs or judges, our wise men and elders, and the head of the family with us enjoyed a similar authority over his household, with that which is ascribed to Abraham and the other patriarchs. The law of retaliation obtained almost universally with us also as with them. Even their religion appeared to have shed upon us a ray of his glory, for we had our circumcision, we had our sacrifices and burnt offerings, our washes and purifications, and on the same occasions as they did. So that means you're showing in that particular regard, and he was a person that was treated as a slave in what we commonly now call the United States. And right there, he said, he stressed the similarity between him and his people and the Israelites of the Old Testament. So how can we say that we should not read the scriptures or read the Bible? And why will that even be thought? Why should we not use it? Who was trying to really keep the scriptures from who? Let's go to a secular source, if you will, on that regard, right? We could call it Secular Source Day. I have a book right here, Christianity, Islam, and the Negro Race by Blyden, all right? To get this going on in this particular aspect. Here, okay, we get to see exactly what it's talking about. It's here on page 36, right? Here's what we're going to read right here, right? And here's what it says in this book. It says the following: if the slave is not allowed to read the Bible, then the sin rests upon the abolitionists, for they stand prepared to furnish him with the key to it, which would make it not a book of hope and love and peace, but of despair, hatred, and blood, which would convert the reader not into a Christian but a demon. So I just want to read this part right here, out of this book right here. It distinctly says if he's allowed to read it, that same book that everyone here and many of our grandmothers had on their shelf, loved, cherished, and adored, if the slave is allowed to read it, then he will become a demon in their eyes. That's how you get the Nat Turners. That's how you get the DeMarc Vessies. That's how you get the Harriet Tubmans. That's how you get all these other people that came up like Robert Smalls and other people, and so forth and so on. So that's why they made sure, to the best of their ability, we didn't read. In my book, Not Plain Salesman, Egypt Talking Writing, I explained that when the gentleman by the name of Gabriel Prosser and what he did in the early 1800s in his slave rebellion, he taught the people in the South, in South Carolina, that they were the people of the Israelites. This got all the way to the people such as James Monroe and Thomas Jefferson. James Monroe was the governor of Virginia at the time, and Thomas Jefferson was then the president. So they already knew, our people were already saying this about who we were. So this is just something just to point out for edification purposes. All right? So I cited my sources in my book, Egypt Talking Writing, concerning it. If you watched the videos in the past, you know what book I'm talking about that I wrote. All right, so just want to get into that particular aspect right there. Now, I have another external source right here. Right? This book is famous, 100 Amazing Facts About the Negro. I'm going to go to page 33 and read 2 lines from it, of this book. All right? So you won't be like, oh, he's biased. He's only dealing with just the Bible. No, you're incorrect. Most of the books I cited, not even scriptures. But anyway, not that we hesitate to use it either. All right? It says this. He says of the philosopher Jews, they are of the Negro type. The large lips, the prognathicism, and the frizzy hair all point to the Negro origin. I have seen the philosophers in Abyssinia and the Negro Jews in Egypt and the Sudan. West Africa has black Jews also. See, it's right here. It's written in this book back in the 30s, 40s, this book came out, where he said right here, West Africa has black Jews also. So how can we deny that particular aspect of what is being spoken of? What we're seeing in part is we, the ones who were shipped over here to a great extent to the Western Hemisphere, are part of those people that scattered into the Western interior of Africa. Now, when did this happen to a great extent? You can go and you read on your own time what happened in 70 AD with Titus. Then the Masada situation that happened in 73 with Lucius Silva of Rome. Then you had the situation with Nerva and Trajan, and the situation at the Kittos battle. Then you had the situation with Hadrian and what happened in the Bar Kokhba battle. So I just wanted to point that out. From 70 AD all the way down to the time of 135 AD, Israel that was still left in the land was already in turmoil and in battle with the Romans. So where were the other people to a certain extent? Biblically, were scattered. We already shown in the beginning of this that you can use the scriptures and external references. So that goes post-Bible as well. What happened after that situation, what we're presenting, is not saying that they didn't go to other parts, but we're primarily speaking in this regard to what happened with the ones that were scattered into Western Africa, as even pointed out in this. The Battle of Cyrene that happened in an era of what happened with Nerva and Trajan was in Libya. Cyrene is in Libya. All right? So what happened with the people as they migrated? We went over that before, about maybe last year, maybe 2015. All right? Israel scattered to the 4 corners on Maccabees TV. So you can reference that video as well. So I didn't want to go over and seem redundant over and over and over again, but just want to point out some other aspects and some other facts concerning this kind of matter. All right, now, want to get into this right here, if we can. All right, we have on page, this right here, right? Oops, page 493, if we will. Here's something that I found to be interesting. It says, sternly he said, don't you be talking that. You hear me? Ain't nobody's business. White folks don't like us doing no reading or writing. Then it says, how come? Because they figures the less we knows, the less troubles we make. So this right here, in chapter 76 of this famous book that came out in the 70s, It's showing why they did not want us to read. Then we also read in here what would happen if our people wind up getting their hands on this book right here. And then we read in this book right here, all right, in regards to what happened. Well, hold on. This Sabbath, circumcision, 8th day, women in her uncleanness, this, that. Whosoever touches us shall be unclean. That's why you find some of the customs of the people scattered, where they don't have the women doing that. So I just wanted to point those couple of things out for edification purposes. Now, all right, in the same book here, we're going to go, all right, on page 771. And here's what we read in this regard. And it says, in quote, in chapter 107, in case you got a different version of the same thing. Well, I don't care what these white folks says, declared Matilda. Master Lincoln doing good for us if he getting them so upset. Fact more, I hear about him, sound like he more like Moses trying to free us chillings of Israel. So I just want to point this out, that's highlighted. Even in this, for what it's worth, many people say, oh, it's a good book, not good book. But even then, if you take this, they were still saying, even in the 1860s, as was said before, that who they were. Many of us knew who we already were prior to that. Now, of course, you're going to have the naysayers, well, how you know they were saying that back then? Because of what I'm reading, all right? You just can't stand on one point. You got to be able to use your reasoning and understanding. So we got to ask, then, who are we if we're not saying who we are as the house of Israel? Because when you say African, that's a whole broad continent. And then on top of that, you're dealing with colonized Africa. So are you from Ghana, Nigeria? Which people and which clan or tribe are you belonging to? All right? Because see, what happens, and it's not to seem harping on the same thing, is they'll keep on trying to talk about, well, you have the African thing and everything's supposed to be about Kemet. Like they did, no offense intended, in the, what's that? Tariq Nasheed video, Hidden Colors Part 1, where the people were saying that our language should be mental meta and so forth and so on. That's just going to show you they pimping it. That's all that is as far as it goes in that regard. Now, we're not saying that the true house of the children of the Egyptians were not a big thing, but they were a big thing for their own people. Now, what I'm going to say sounds harsh, and I say no disrespect. The man who was revered among them, Yosef ben Yochanan, right? His name is Hebrew. His claim in many of his videos is that he descended from the people called the Falasha, who call themselves Beit Yisrael. Some Israelites say they real people of Israel. Some people Israelites say they not. All right, even some Old Testament Israelites be like, those Hamites. But anyway, yes, there's some Old Testament Israelites that say those are Hamites. But regardless of what somebody's saying, the claim that they're making about them being the true house of Israel, and Dr. Ben Yochanan, coming from that, would Ramses accept him speaking about him in Egyptian history? Or would he say, get this caputo up out my face? So this is some of the ways you can tell that that whole society thing there is just pit. All right, so I just wanted to point that out for edification purposes. All right, in concluding this subject, I just want to get into this right here. This is called the Zenon Papyri. This is dated to the era of the 3rd century BCE. All right? Oh, pardon me. The 3rd century BCE. All right? And, yep, 3rd century BCE. Now, this is describing, as shown, Jews in Hellenistic Egypt. So let's see what it says about them in Hellenistic Egypt. It said, I have sent you, Ananias, bringing a eunuch and 4 boys, house slaves, and of good stock, 2 of whom are uncircumcised. 67. I append descriptions of the boys for your information. Goodbye. Then it says their description: dark skin, curly hair, black eyes, rather big jaws, with moles on the right jaw, uncircumcised. Another description of the same people, of the Jews of Hellenistic Egypt: light skin, curly hair, nose somewhat flat, black eyes, scar below the right eye. Another description: curly hair, nose flat, protruding lips. scar near the right eyebrow, circumcised. So, hold on, let me understand what's going on here. This right here is a picture of the Zinah Papyri, all right? And this is speaking about the Greeks and the rule that they had over the house of Israel that's scattered in Egypt and Northeast Africa. How were they described? Dark skin, light skin, rather large nose, rather large jawbones. Who is that looking like? Okay, just want to point that out for edification purposes. The children of Israel of the ancient world were not Caucasian or white. Okay, so I just want to point that out. Now, in this right here, okay, this book here, Black Culture and Black Consciousness. We won't read just one line, because this right here is a pretty sad book. Speaks about certain aspects and so forth and so on. All right. It says this, recounting slavery in Florida. Check this part out. Even here, the slaves were often discovered by white patrols. Then they would rush in and start whipping and beating the slaves unmerciful, West Turner of Virginia reported. And do you know what some of them devils were even mean and sinful enough to say? If I catch you here serving God, I'll beat you. You ain't got no time to serve God. We brought you to serve us. So this right here is a recount of what happened in Florida in slavery, according to this book right here. So if they were, according to this, serving God, they were told not to do so. So the understanding of worship and prayer that our people had, like you even seen with them prostrating, and even in roots and in other documentations about our people praying in pots during slavery so they won't be heard. Somebody mentioned when me and Sha'al did a video that prayer and worship came from the Europeans. No, it did not. Brother or sister, whoever made the comment. The concept of idea of worship came from us. See, what happened essentially is you had people like York and Clark and Ben, well, pardon me, let me just say Ben and Clark, who tried to give you in Africa that was based upon a collegiate Africa, which they was basically pimping Africa, where Egypt is the pinnacle and everything else just falls on the line. We're all one people, just different cultures. That doesn't make any sense as far as it goes with that. But I just want to point that out in that kind of aspect. And that the concept of worship and prayer and so forth and so on and quote unquote religion came from the Europeans. That's the doctrine today. But yet Ben and Clark taught in their day that the Europeans were taught about God from the Africans. But now the modern day scholars that you see on YouTube, following in the same vein of the Kemet stuff, are saying that we should be atheists and that God had nothing to do with it, and that it's a European creation. What are you talking about? See, this is what happens when you read in Isaiah 60, when the Most High said that gross darkness has covered the people. This is what we're seeing online today, in part. So, I just want that to be noted a little bit for edification purposes, and so forth and so on. In closing out, right, books aside, so that way it can be seen I'm closing out. Deuteronomy 28:68. I want to touch on that very briefly. You have to take it from a standpoint and an aspect of the Hebrew understanding. If I'm telling somebody in the 1970s, give me a five, a high five, like this, they used to give each other a high five. But if you're thinking, like some may think, high getting five, Looney's style, I got five on it, give me that bag of weed, or Looney's or Lunas or whatever the group is, and all you're getting good understanding said the scriptures. So when it says Egypt began by ships, it's not talking about what Titus is said to have done, because as we went over before, and I went over in my book, both books actually, they were shipped from Egypt to in Northeast Africa to Italy. See, what they're trying to do is trying to cut the house of Israel off, all right, at 70 AD. So that way they can implement the whole concept of Christianity, then later on Islam, then later on Kemetic science. So you got to get rid of Israel like that. But you're trying to use the scriptures of Israel to do so, but you can't do that. Because the Most High said that wars Israel is continually before me. So you can't sit there and use the scriptures in that regard. There's people who have followed me apparently on YouTube and were saying, oh brother, you're trying too hard, and that happened in the era of Josephus in 70 AD and so forth and so on. No, it didn't, because Alexander Tiberius, that some of the people try to cite to me about,
was a person that was already in Egypt, and he was already killed in 70 AD. So how can 70 AD be the aspect that you're talking about from Deuteronomy 28:68 about the people that was already in Alexandria, Egypt? Then one Caucasian guy attempted to say that, well, in Josephus it says he seldom down the Nile. So I asked him, where in Josephus does it say that Titus sold the people down the Nile? That wasn't shown either. In order for their doctrine to stand, the house of Israel is going to have to fall. So now that they see the children of Israel creeping up here, there, quote unquote non-messianic, quote unquote messianic, so forth and so on, they got to try to put little wedges in between. One of the latest things that's come out is an attempt to say that what you're speaking is not ancient Hebrew. Here's my question to that regard. If you're only unilateral, in other words, you only know one language, and you're saying that what we have is not translated from ancient Hebrew, then how can you say it's ancient Hebrew? How do you have a name for something that you say is unable to be deciphered? If it can't be deciphered, then how can you call it something? That doesn't make any kind of sense. You can't call this something and then at the same token say, oh, this was never deciphered, it can never be decoded, it can never be translated. If you can call it that, then you can make a move to sit there and translate it. That's just logic. But when you're hating, that shit'll block wisdom. Shalom.